Welcome to the GreenBox Shift, where Matt and Kim Trent share career insights to help you turn potential into achievement. Join us weekly as we explore powerful concepts, offer actionable advice, and guide you from limitations to success.
In this episode, we're going to explore how deliberate practice can enhance the way you communicate your professional strengths. We'll discuss how taking the time to clearly define and articulate your unique skills and experiences can help you effectively convey your value to others.
So let's get started by breaking down the concept of deliberate practice and understanding why it's so effective in helping you achieve mastery in your professional communication.
So the topic we're discussing today is kind of a combo of two concepts that are really near and dear to our hearts, and that is deliberate practice and professional messaging, and how you use deliberate practice in conjunction with your professional messaging. So let's start off, Matt. What is deliberate practice for people who don't know what that term means?
So deliberate practice is this idea that you're practicing something, normal practice, there's repetition involved in it, but there's an intent or there's a focus behind it that is more than just the repetitive action of something. So for example, if you go to the golfing range and driving range and you get a bucket of balls and you're hitting balls, if all you're doing while you're swinging and hitting those balls is just working on the physical motion of the swing, that's not deliberate practice. Deliberate practice would be if you're swinging and hitting all those balls in that bucket and you're putting yourself in scenarios or you're trying to work on particular things that involve more than just the actual swing itself. So there's some intent, there's some desire beyond just the physical motion of swinging the golf club. There's, hey, I want to, hit 10 balls out to this distance. I want to hit the next 10 to this distance. You're putting yourself in scenarios where you're going beyond just the repetitive motion of the golf swing, and you're actually putting something else in conjunction with the swinging of the club. So for us, when we talk about deliberate practice in the context of professional messaging, it's that we believe that every time you work on building out your professional messaging and the topics in your professional messaging, if you know that there's another thing that you're going to do with that ultimately, which is, for example, if you're sitting down, you're writing down some of your pick. The idea is that when you're writing that pick down, that you ultimately know that you're going to be using that pick and the things that you're writing down to share with other people. So it makes you think about the exercise in a little bit different way, and rather than just, I'm going to sit down and write a bunch of things down. This is the problem that people have when they build their resumes. They go, I'm going to sit down and write all these things out. I'm going to cram everything onto a couple of pages, put everything in here, and oh my gosh, it's done. It's on there. Great. I don't have to think about it again. I can just start using this resume.
But with no intent.
No intent, because it's not telling a story. It's just listing a bunch of things. The deliberate practice is, hey, we want to take something like pick and we want to document it and we want to write it down in a way that if we then take that exercise or that work that we've done, that deliberate practice, then we go over to a resume, it's much easier to build one. If we want to go to a LinkedIn profile, it's much easier to fill one out because it's consistent with the deliberate practice that you did on the messaging in the very beginning. You're just carrying that through in terms of now you have a way to share it with other people.
So in terms of deliberate practice, how do you ensure that you have lots of clarity and consistency in your professional messaging?
Well, this is where, if it's just a matter of just writing things down, writing your messaging down and not putting a lot of thought into it, kind of like the example I use with the resume, it's hard to be consistent when you're doing that because it's almost like a one-off thing. It's a one-time, oh, I need to write something here. I need to fill this part of my resume out. Let me just grab this and put this in here. If you're actually using deliberate practice when you're thinking about what you're going to write and how you're going to ultimately use it, you'll start to develop those storylines or those ideas about what is this actually saying to people. You're actually practicing and rehearsing what you're going to say to another person or what they're going to ultimately read, what you're going to communicate to them, either on the written page or verbally. You're practicing that with intent. So you ensure that there's a greater likelihood of consistency in your statement. Example, if you're having a conversation with somebody and they ask you a question about something you haven't thought about for a long time, or maybe never really thought about it, and you give an answer, might sound great, might be awesome. You might be asked the next question though, and when you recall something that you hadn't thought about for a while, you make a statement, you're like, boy, that doesn't sound like it's even consistent with the last thing I just said. So there's apparent inconsistencies, whether they're real or not. If our messaging is not clear, sometimes two messages will walk over the top of each other, and that causes a problem for people, especially when you're meeting people for the first time and they don't really know much about you. If you start to say things that are inconsistent, that's an automatic way for people to kind of discount what you're saying. It invalidates a lot of what you say, even if there's the appearance of an inconsistency between a couple of statements that you made. So again, you want to use deliberate practice methods while we're writing down things so that we know in our professional messaging, because when we share it, we want to make sure it's consistent and it's not stepping over something else that we might say.
Right. And it seems like the more you would use those deliberate practice methods to write things down, you would start to see the common threads, and that allows you to more easily share them in your messaging, whether it's person to person or in a profile that you build or in a resume.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we're ultimately trying to do here is share the story of who we are and what we know. And the more we spend focused time on that, and we can understand how the different, storylines, if you will, or the different experiences that we have kind of fit together and tell a story, it's much easier to see those common threads that go between everything and see how everything's tied together.
Right.
Good example of this is we're constantly doing this. When we learn something, so think back to earlier in your career when you learned how to do something, right? You had an experience where you're like, okay, maybe it's something okay, I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to be out of the office for a week. Well, there's preparation that you do to be gone for a week, right? So
Right.
Other people have you pick up your responsibilities. Your management knows that you're going to be out, that there's preparation work done. Well, you know that. And so that becomes something that you understand that level of preparation around that for you. Well, so for example, let's say you're now managing people. Well, you take those experiences and what works in terms of vacation preparation, and you ensure that you put good policies and procedures and best practices in place for the people that work for you. So before they leave, they're doing these things. Well, the green thread that kind of goes between that, if you're sharing that with another person, you're saying, early in my career, I learned it's so important to do adequate preparation before I'm going to be gone out of the office, right? That means that things are documented, they're organized, they're reported on in such a way that people can understand it. I took what I did for myself then, and when I managed my team, I implemented some of those same best practices so that I could have a whole group of people that I was responsible for doing the same thing. So now our organization was prepared when anybody was out, the team could still be successful. So you're telling that's a green thread. And if you practice your messaging and you're thinking about the consistency between what you're writing and what you're documenting and what you're ultimately going to say, you can see how those two things fit together.
Right.
You learned it for yourself. You applied it when you change roles.
Right.
Just remove vacation preparation and put something else, preparation for reviews. What was that like when you didn't have responsibility for writing somebody else's review, just your own? Okay, then you moved into a role where you had to not only write your own because you were being evaluated, but you had to write things for other people. How did you take those experiences and move those forward? These are just examples of when you're documenting these things or thinking about what you know, you're doing that in such a way that you're putting this deliberate practice element to it, where you realize that I'm not just writing words down or typing words, that I'm ultimately going to use these again in some form of fashion.
Right.
So when you get to really, really important things, super important things that are universally applicable, regardless of the job, the opportunity, whatever you're doing, you start to build good stories around these when you use these deliberate practice techniques. So that when you talk to people, it seems you're we describe it as it's very fluid. It just comes out when you talk to people, and you don't have to put a lot of thought into it, but you're not worried about inconsistent statements being made because you practice this deliberately so much that it just kind of all fits together. Tells a good story.
Right.
All the pieces fit. Green threads go between all of it. Yeah, that type of thing.
So in terms of deliberate practice, how does personal intellectual capital or PIC fit into deliberate practice around your professional messaging?
Yeah, I mean, that's why PIC is the core thing. And, it's good to just start by writing down a few things that a skill, knowledge, or experience that you have, and then just work to ensure that you're building your messaging off of those things. And so what we teach people in our courses and the services that we provide, we go really in depth on this. So, there are people that we've worked with that have, 100 and something elements of PIC all documented, and then they can basically write stories and give scenarios for any one of these 100 plus things they have written down. And so what that allows them to do is really, in an extreme way, be able to go from a red box to a green box in any situation. They're so fluent with all these things that they know. Well, you don't start out at that point. We built a system to be able to, and a method to be able to get people to scale to that level, right?
Right.
The more success they wanted to achieve. But just at its most basic rudimentary level, it's taking some of those basic things that you understand about yourself, skill, knowledge, and experience, writing those down, and then just practice your messaging around that, because that deliberate practice is what's going to allow you to be very fluent when you're talking to other people. But there is a way, if you're sitting out there thinking, yeah, I know a lot of things, then you need to use really one of our methods that we teach. Our methods are a step-by-step process to really, in a very detailed, comprehensive way, get all of that stuff in here out on paper, and then now we can start to work with it because we've got it documented for the first time. In our foundations course, we actually take you through this. In our self-guided course, we take you through what our method is for doing this, and you can, you know a lot more than you think you know. These lists of PIC are just massive. And again, the more you can discover and document, the better off you're going to be, because you can practice it, then you can share it with other people more easily.
The more you employ that deliberate practice concept around documenting your personal intellectual capital, the more you can use those red box to green box techniques to move into that opportunity area of the green box. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, because when you look at how you actually move from the known or the kind of what's expected, right, in a role, over to those unexplored, finding somebody's unexplored needs, is you start to apply more personal intellectual capital. That's what moves the intersection point out of the red box over into the green.
Right.
Your capabilities go up, and your amount of intellectual capital that you're sharing with people goes up, and it intersects at a point outside of the red box, and it intersects in the green. So the fact that you can ask questions to move somebody into that green box area, that's when you're really going to figure out what their those needs are they have. So people are going to tell you, hey, we're here to solve this problem. And that's always the red box, right? That's what they think they need.
Right.
Right? Or what they want. It's what they want. You want to ask a series of questions using your intellectual capital to make them think about other things that they might actually need to have that coincide with that and complement that red box. And that's when we're in the green box. And again, think about any conversation you've ever had with anybody where they weren't necessarily doing that intentionally with this red box and green box scenario, but they were asking you questions for a reason to figure out what other things you needed.
Right.
Right? Those questions were their way of moving into the green box. How do they know which questions to ask? Because they have intellectual capital that tells them, these are other things I need to ask this person about.
So you're asking the questions to kind of deliberately lead somebody into that green box area, and you're demonstrating your knowledge by the questions that you ask.
That's right. So your questions you asked are indicative of your PIC.
Right.
Absolutely. So this happens a lot when you have and just in life in general. So like with any occupation. So an interesting one was like I remember we had a really good mechanic and we took our car to him and he looked at it and said, I said, okay, we're here for the oil change and, the filters or whatever. Because he had a massive amount of pick as a car mechanic and he'd worked on our type of car a lot. He knew a lot of things about our car. That was a lot of pick he had, right? He had a lot of knowledge about that particular brand or make, model, whatever. So he said, guys, yeah, you're due for an oil change, but in another 1,000 miles, you're going to be due for these, the spark plugs to be changed, because when I have to open up this part of under the hood, I have to go this part, I have to take this out, and I have to be able to get to these filters to change these filters. Well, I'm in there, the fuse box, the spark plugs are right there. I can change the spark plugs out. And would you be interested in me doing that today? It's going to actually save you some money because it has to be done pretty soon. But I'm already in there, so my labor, I won't charge you twice for the labor. He was asking questions that were indicative of the fact that he knows that there are spark plugs over here, that when he's in doing this filter change, that the spark plug's right there. He knows his pick tells him that this needs to happen every so often per the miles.
Right.
He was able to position that back, and we were able to buy another service from him. He was able to sell us another service. It was a win-win because we saved some money. And he was also in there and he drove some additional revenue off of the opportunity because he had picked that he just knew the car and he knew the layout of all those things.
And he knew that ability to save us the labor cost by doing it then versus waiting 5 months or something to do it later would be a way to persuade us to go ahead and...
Yeah, ease of use. You're already here. You've already got it.
Right.
And I've already got it up and I'm looking at it. I'm working on it. It'll save you guys the hassle and all the rest of it. And, and then it also kept us as a customer, because if we would have drove off and potentially somebody else might have done that work and not him. So his ability to go beyond the known, hey, these guys want an oil change and a filter change. That's what they want.
Right.
We needed it, but that's what they want. But so I'm going to give them what they want so they can ultimately ask them some questions to figure out what they really need. Well, it just makes sense that they're going to need this anyway. So let's figure out how to make this work. And so that's an example of something that's completely random, but it happens every day where people are doing this that probably just don't have a way to describe it like this.
They're not really thinking about it.
Right. But that's what makes it that mechanic was so great versus somebody else who's like, oh, you just wanted an oil change.
Right.
Now we're back 5 months later doing the spark plugs because, and now we have to take time to go do that. So,
and maybe not going to him.
That's right.
Right.
This is actually right. So if you use that mindset, your pick has a lot to do with it. You want that messaging down. You don't want to be that's the first time that you have a conversation with somebody where you're trying to figure out the GreenBox for them, the unexplored needs. But the more you know about your subject matter with your knowledge, your skill or experience, that makes it so much easier to ask the questions, because it's at that point you've got these reference points built to go, oh, I know with this job that people want these things, but I'm also, when I look at it, I know there's these other things that you really need to have with it. So let me ask about that as well and see if there's another opportunity for me. It's kind of like the mechanic.
In terms of professional messaging and the platinum rule, how do those things work together?
Deliberate practice, the platinum rule, and pick all kind of fit together, because if you take your pick and then you apply the platinum rule, which is communicate with others in the way they want to be communicated to, your core message is not changing. The way you deliver it can slightly change based on what your audience wants from you.
Right.
The person that you're sharing it with. If you know that person wants things in a very brief, concise way, then you deliver in a very brief, concise way. Same content, you're just doing it in a brief way, concise. If the next person that you talk to wants it, is asking you questions, you're going to share your pick with them, but they want more of a more detailed version, a slower paced way for you to describe it and take them through the story and tell them about the emotion or whatever it is, or the people or whatever. That's just a different communication style. So what you're doing is you're saying, well, I'll take my same pick and I'll just take the same core message and I'll slightly change how I'm delivering it to that person, because they want a little bit something different than the first person did. Brief, concise, to the point, I want a little bit longer explanation, a little bit more people focused, maybe a little bit slower pace, and you deliver it to me and you just make the adjustment. The bottom line is the reason that you're applying the platinum rule is because you don't want this to get lost. This pick is so important that you share it with people. You don't want it to get lost in from a communication challenge. You certainly just don't want to assume they have your communication style. You have to listen, observe a little bit, and then deliver things back to them in a particular way. This is where some of the things we've talked about before, like mimicking, come in. When you first meet somebody, just understand their communication style and mimic it back to people. It's just the easiest way to get people comfortable with how you're speaking to them.
Yeah, at a very basic level, that's the simplest way.
Very basic level. Now, we teach some more detailed and comprehensive ways to not only understand somebody's communication style very quickly, but then to engage an entire series of best practices for what to do when somebody's demonstrating a very specific thing. And you have to understand a system or a method to be able to understand how to do that. Once you can do that, that's where we would say you're reaching mastery levels of communication in terms of talking to somebody.
Like an example would be in conflict, a person with the specific communication style will act this way, so this is what you should do to counteract that,
right,
or to offset it.
Yeah, so you're you're operating at a level now with somebody where you're saying, okay, I'm understanding at a high level, this person speaks quickly, this person speaks slowly. I know this person wants concise explanations. I know this one wants a little bit more detail. What you're talking about, which we teach people in our foundations course, is we teach people to observe behaviors now. That's another level down in terms of depth of understanding. How do they deal with, personal rejection in this situation?
Right.
And what should you do if you see somebody doing this particular thing? You've taken these observations into account and you're going, okay, here's my best practice tells me that when we're engaged in conflict, for example, somebody becomes more reserved, and here's why they become more reserved. Or this person is becoming more assertive. Well, why are they becoming more assertive? It might be because they're a hyper-competitive person. Well, then you're doing this instead.
So what are some ways that you can practice these deliberate practice methods?
Well, yeah, writing some things down is one way. We talked about that quite a bit. But another way is that, you can do this very easily with somebody that you trust and that you know. Have that person take a job description for a role that you're interested in. Even if you're not looking for a job, just go pull a job description for something that you would be a fit for. You have an interest in on some level. Presumably you've got pick that aligns with it, right? But when that person starts to ask you questions, let them ask you questions and you can practice on how you're speaking and sharing things with this individual. That's a form of deliberate practice because there's intent behind what you're doing.
Right.
It's not just empty words or not tying these things together. You're actually practicing this with another human being. That's really good for practicing for going into an interview, for example. So if you are a job seeker and this is a real job that you're interested in pursuing, have somebody, again, that you have an authentic relationship with, not somebody who's going to tell you what you want to hear, but somebody who will give you an honest feedback and give you honest, constructive criticism. I think another thing that you can do is you can just look at different scenarios and understand scenarios that are ones that pop up quite a bit, so that they're kind of universally applicable. So there's always, communication between people, between teammates or with superiors and subordinates, all those things. You take common things like that and you put some thought around it. You go, okay, I've been in that situation before. What was successful that I did to deal with it? What was a challenge about it? And then just work through that in your mind and, take some notes, practice through that. Cause that's, again, a form of deliberate practice. You're taking a particular scenario and you're thinking about how you've reacted in that particular situation, what worked, what didn't work. You're able then to explain that to another person. Because those common scenarios you run into, you're going to run into those all the time. Those are things that in job interviews, as an example, get brought out a lot. Hey, tell me about a time when you were in this situation. Oh, okay. Let me respond to that, right? Well, these are things that you practiced ahead of time so that your answers are more, fluid.
Right.
So that's just a couple of ideas about what you can practice. So just to put a fine point on deliberate practice, I guess, again, It's like, do you want to go to the driving range, hit a bucket of golf balls, and just all you're doing is just out there just swinging the club? Or do you want to...
Right. Just make contact with the ball and you're happy.
Yeah.
No.
Or do you want to get out there and go, hey, I want to practice with some intent behind this. I want some deliberate thing that I'm doing while I'm doing this swinging motion. Same thing with writing down all of these things about your pick and these common situations, all the rest of the stuff we talked about. You don't need a lot of these. I mean, it helps if you're in more sophisticated situations where you're moving from red to GreenBox a lot. But if you're just in normal conversations with people, you don't need a whole lot of these. You just need enough of them that you feel comfortable talking about them and you can share them with other people. That just keeps the conversation moving. And people feel like, wow, there's no inconsistent statement this person's making. Everything they say seems to align with some larger message.
All right. Our submitted questions for this week have come in, and the first one is from a job seeker. How can I effectively network if I'm naturally introverted?
I think the best thing that you can do if you're kind of a naturally introverted person when it comes to networking is use a tool like LinkedIn, because now that's not the end goal, is to connect with people on LinkedIn and have 10,000 connections. We want to actually put those connections to work and build relationships off of them. But it is a way, if you're more introverted, to be able to study people before you approach them, before you send them an invitation, understand who they are, what their focus is, how you might relate to what they say. These are all things as an introvert. I think the more you can do that, the more comfortable you potentially be when you talk to somebody. I just caution you with LinkedIn that you don't stop at just connect. You don't just into connection building, right? That if you're introverted, your thought process you might be more inclined to just stop at the connections and not pursue them. It should give you some comfort and some confidence when you're reaching out to people, that it's like, I can really study who these people are and understand how I want to initially position a conversation with them based on what their background is.
Find that common thing maybe between the two of you to
exactly right.
Comment on something.
But I would say this: if you're an introvert, you go into situations where it's a public scenario where you're meeting people in public. Again, what everybody should be trying to do is find the best way that they relate to another person. So we want to find common reference points.
Well, and the better that you understand what you know, your pick, the more likely you're going to be to find some common reference point with another person.
Correct.
And the more you use that deliberate practice to understand your pick and think about your stories behind different things, the easier those words will come in those situations if maybe you're more introverted.
Exactly. You're always looking for common reference points. So at a minimum, I joke with people, I'm like, people will tell me I don't have anything in common with this person. I'm like, you have one major thing in common. You're both human beings.
Yeah.
Right. So don't tell me you don't have anything in common. But sometimes the answer is the obvious, what you have in common with somebody. So when you are meeting somebody at a job, at a networking event, right? Well, presumably you're both there for just the same reason.
Right.
You have that in common, right? Or you meet somebody at a sporting event or a concert or something, right? Well, again, presumably you have something in common. You're there for the same interest. You're there to see one or both of the teams play, or to see a concert, or whatever it might be. See, there's easy things to just kick up and talk about with people if you just figure out what those common reference points are. It's an easiest way for an introvert to become on the networkers when they can quickly identify those things and go to the common reference points and talk about them.
Right, because that makes the conversation much easier. Okay, and from a professional development, how can I ask for a promotion or raise without coming across as pushy?
People don't like to be surprised, and they don't like things coming out of nowhere. So it's much better if you and your manager have this understanding that you are trying to pursue something, a promotion or a pay increase, or there's something that both of you are collaborating on. So this is a us against them thing, or two people going against each other in an adversarial way. It should be a collaborative way. So if you view your relationship with your boss in this way, it is a collaboration. You're not going to surprise this person. You're not going to come across as abrupt, because you're laying these things out in a way where people feel like they're working together to achieve something. That's very different than how most people do this, which is they don't say anything. And then they get to a point where it's like, hey, I've been here this long and I haven't gotten a promotion, or I haven't gotten the pay increase I'm looking for. I haven't gotten the special work I want to do, whatever it is. There's just a lack of communication, and it's not viewed as a collaborative relationship. It's viewed as an adversarial one.
Your boss says, well, I didn't know that was important to you.
Exactly right. That's what comes back. So at best, it's neutral. At worst, it's adversarial. And you want them to be neither. You want them to be collaborative relationships. And that's how you start to solve some of this problem with that you're not coming across pushy or something, because everybody understands the goal. And actually, it's better if you're the one pursuing something, that somebody who presumably has some role in it, right? Your boss or whatever, if you've made them part of the process, they feel like they're on the adventure with you.
Right.
Again, that's an easier way to look at collaboration versus kind of something that's either neutral or adversarial.
So it sounds like, again, this kind of gets back to good communication, right?
Good communication, and you need to understand your pick, and you need to make sure that that person understands and values your pick. You need to be always working towards that, because if they see you as somebody who's understands all these different things, and not only understands them, but can also, solve problems with it, again, you've increased your value. It's easier for you to, justify some of these requests that this person that was asked about has, right? About, a promotion or some kind of salary increase or something like that.
And the last question from an entrepreneur: what are some effective ways to manage stress as a business owner?
So one of the biggest stress areas as a business owner is when you have to focus on things you don't particularly like or interested in or aren't good at or not part of your core competency set of skills or pick. So one of the things that, I really challenged myself to do as a business owner in the beginning was I wanted to achieve enough success that I could take those things and ship those out to other people for them to work on it. I thought, hey, there are people who love working on these particular things. I'd rather let those people do that, because there's stuff I can do they can't do. I need to drive my business and talk about my business. That's what I want to go focus on, is that, and not worry. I have to worry about these things being done. I don't necessarily have to be the one doing them. That's probably the biggest area of stress for a lot of people. There are other areas of stress where I think just normal running a business can be a very stressful thing. So you have a good network of people around you so that you can rely on other people, and especially business owners where they're more empathetic. They'll understand, hey, yeah, I had that problem too. Here's some ideas about how to solve it. There's a lot of benefit.
Or maybe a piece of business that you had to farm out. They have contacts through their business, a really good person who maybe does bookkeeping or accounting.
Yeah, there's no substitute for having people around you that can relate with what you're going through. And entrepreneurs are kind of in a unique situation because, once you become one, you kind of have this, talk about a common reference point. You have a really big reference point with other people that are trying to do the same thing, right? So there's something to be said about surrounding yourself with other people who have, and not everybody has to be super successful. It can be people who just have figured aspects of something out in their work as an entrepreneur, where that little piece of information helps you tremendously.
Right.
You don't need to talk to every success story in the world to learn things. You can learn from other people's failures, what worked, what didn't work, all those things. So again, I think it's just back to having a good network of people around you that can give you some good, insights. And entrepreneurs, if you're an entrepreneur, finding other entrepreneurs is really important.
What we've discussed today is just the beginning. If you're serious about mastering the skills that will take your career to the next level, deliberate practice is key.
In our Foundations course and personalized coaching sessions, we dive deeper into the strategies behind deliberate practice, offering tools and guidance to help you apply this powerful method to your own career. Visit greenboxu.com to learn more and start your journey toward mastery.
Ready to dive deeper? Head over to greenboxu.com to check out our Foundations course, as well as our other products and services designed for lasting success. We'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, and submit questions for future episodes. Until next time, keep exploring and unlocking your potential. See you on the next episode of the GreenBox Shift.